The horrified screeches of the Selae echoed through the cavernous halls as the human cryo chambers hissed open. Phillips blinked awake, his mind instantly alert. The xenobiologist glanced around the dimly lit chamber, taking in the sight of his fellow survivors stirring from their slumber. A feeling of unease settled in his gut. Something had gone wrong. Ramos, the engineer, was already at the control panel, his brows furrowed in concentration as he assessed the damage. "Cryo system malfunction," he reported grimly. "We've got pods failing left and right. If we don't stabilize them soon, we'll lose the rest of the passengers." Phillips nodded, his jaw set with determination. He moved to assist Ramos, their hands working in tandem to jury-rig repairs and prevent further catastrophe. As they labored, Jameson and Sergeant Hawkins huddled nearby, poring over the scant information they had on the Selae homeworld. "We need a plan," Jameson murmured, his eyes scanning the alien text scrolling across the screen. "If these Selae are as advanced as they seem, we can't afford to make a wrong move." Hawkins grunted his agreement, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. "Diplomacy is all well and good, but we need to be prepared for anything. These aliens might not take kindly to a bunch of refugees showing up unannounced." As the ship descended through the atmosphere, the humans gathered at the viewports, their eyes widening at the sight of the sprawling Selae metropolis below. Gleaming spires and sleek vehicles spoke of a civilization far beyond anything they had ever known. The ship touched down on the outskirts of the city, and the humans disembarked, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. A delegation of Selae awaited them, led by a towering figure named Belos. Phillips stepped forward, his hand extended in greeting, but faltered at the look of disdain on Belos's face. The Selae leader regarded the humans with a mixture of curiosity and condescension, as if they were little more than primitive creatures to be studied and patronized. In that moment, Phillips realized the true gravity of their situation. They were strangers in a strange land, their very existence dependent on the whims of a superior species. If they couldn't find a way to prove their worth, to carve out a place in this new world, they would be doomed to fade into obscurity, a footnote in Selae history. The future of the human race hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. As the human survivors settled into their temporary accommodations, a sense of guarded optimism hung in the air. The stark, utilitarian quarters, provided by the Selae, were a far cry from the comforts of Earth, but they represented a chance at survival, a foothold in this strange new world. Phillips wasted no time in diving into his study of Selae culture and biology. He pored over ancient texts and scientific journals, his mind racing with possibilities. When he first met Zara, the brilliant Selae scientist, he was struck by her keen intellect and insatiable curiosity. Together, they spent long hours in the laboratory, comparing notes and trading theories, each pushing the other to new heights of understanding. Jameson, ever the skilled diplomat, prepared meticulously for his meeting with the Selae High Council. He rehearsed his arguments until they flowed like water, his voice ringing with conviction as he spoke of the potential for peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. The Selae leaders listened intently, their expressions unreadable, but Jameson could sense a glimmer of hope in their eyes. In the training grounds, Sergeant Hawkins grunted with exertion as he sparred with Theron, the seasoned Selae warrior. Their movements were a blur of speed and precision, each testing the limits of the other's skill. As they fought, Hawkins couldn't help but marvel at the Selae's advanced tactics and technology, and worry about what it could mean for humanity's future. Ramos, meanwhile, lost himself in the wonders of Selae engineering. He marveled at the sleek lines and pulsing energy of their propulsion systems, his fingers itching to take them apart and understand their secrets. Lyra, the young Selae prodigy, watched him work with a mixture of amusement and admiration. Together they pushed the boundaries of what was possible, their minds dancing with visions of a brighter tomorrow. But even as the human survivors made strides towards integration, dark currents swirled beneath the surface. In shadowy corners and hidden chambers, Zorn and his followers whispered poisonous words, stoking the flames of fear and hatred. And in the depths of the purest stronghold, Keln sharpened his blades and plotted his next move, his eyes glinting with malice. The human survivors remained oblivious to the gathering storm, their focus solely on the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. They knew that their every action, their every word, could tip the balance between acceptance and annihilation. And so they pressed on, driven by the unshakable conviction that they would not only survive, but thrive in this brave new world. Phillips leaned over the microscope, his eyes widening as he observed the cellular changes. "Zara, come look at this," he called to his Sci colleague. The tall, lithe alien glided across the lab, her multifaceted eyes glinting with curiosity. She peered into the microscope, her mandibles clicking excitedly. "Extraordinary," she chittered. "The genetic hybridization is progressing far more rapidly than anticipated." Phillips nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "If these results hold, we could have Earth crops adapted to Sealay's soil within months instead of years." As they worked, the lab buzzed with activity. Human and Sealay scientists moved in tandem, their differences fading in the face of shared discovery. The air thrummed with the potential of their breakthrough. Across the city, Jameson stood before the Sealay High Council, his voice steady as he presented the final draft of the Human-Sealay Accord. "This agreement represents a new era of cooperation between our peoples," he said, gesturing to the holographic display. "It ensures our right to live and work alongside you, while also protecting Sealay interests." The council members conferred in low tones, their elongated heads bobbing as they deliberated. Finally, the lead counselor spoke. "We accept the terms of this accord," he announced. "However, the awakening of additional humans from cryostasis will require our explicit approval." Jameson's heart sank, but he maintained his composure. "Understood," he replied, knowing the weight this decision would place on him and his fellow survivors. In the military district, Sergeant Hawkins circled Theron, his muscles taut as they sparred. The Sealay warrior's carapace gleamed under the harsh lights, his movements fluid and precise. As they grappled, Hawkins noticed a data pad that had fallen from Theron's equipment belt. Curiosity piqued, he scooped it up during a break. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the contents. "Theron," he called, his voice tight. "You need to see this." The Sealay approached, head tilted in confusion. Hawkins showed him the screen, pointing to a series of encrypted messages. "These look like weapons manifests and recruitment logs," he explained, "and they're signed by someone called Keln." Theron's mandibles flared in alarm. "The purists!" he hissed. "We must alert command immediately." Meanwhile, in the engineering sector, Ramos and Lyra hunched over a complex array of holographic displays. Their fingers danced across the controls, adjusting variables and running simulations. "There," Ramos exclaimed, pointing to a pulsing diagram. "If we integrate the quantum flux stabilizer with your graviton drive..." Lyra's eyes lit up. "We could achieve faster-than-light travel without the need for massive energy expenditure," she finished. "Ramos, this is revolutionary." As news of their breakthrough spread, crowds of humans and Sealay alike gathered outside the engineering complex, eager for a glimpse of the visionaries who might reshape the future of space travel. But even as these triumphs unfolded, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. In the halls of power, Zorn's voice rang out, amplified by fear and prejudice. "We must protect our way of life," he declared to a rapt audience. "The humans must be contained, for their safety and ours." His words found fertile ground among those who feared change, and soon the city buzzed with heated debates about the human presence. Deep in the shadows of the metropolis, Keln received an encoded transmission. A human face flickered on the screen, distorted but recognizable as one of those still in cryostasis. "We're ready," the figure said, voice thick with bitterness. "Just give us the signal, and we'll show those traitors what it means to abandon their own kind." Keln's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, he would strike a blow that would shake the foundations of this fragile alliance. As night fell over the Sealay capital, Phillips, Jameson, Hawkins, and Ramos gathered in their shared living space. The mood was tense, each aware of the growing unrest that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. "We need a plan," Hawkins growled, pacing the room. "The purists are gearing up for something big, I can feel it." Jameson nodded grimly. "And Zorn's rhetoric is gaining traction. If we're not careful, we could find ourselves trapped in an enclave, cut off from everything we've built here. Phillips leaned forward, his eyes bright with persistence. Then we fight back the only way we can, he said, with progress. Our breakthroughs, our innovations, they're the best weapons we have against fear and ignorance. Ramos nodded in agreement. We've come too far to give up now, he added. Whatever comes next, we face it together. As they spoke, the city pulsed around them, a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. In labs and council chambers, in training grounds and engineering bays, the future of two species hung in the balance. And in the darkness, unseen forces gathered, preparing to strike at the heart of everything they had built. The calm of the Sci night was shattered by a deafening explosion. Phillips jolted awake, his heart racing as acrid smoke filled the air. Through the haze, he saw Jameson stumbling towards him, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "We're under attack," Jameson coughed, pulling Phillips to his feet. "The purists, they're targeting us." As if to emphasize his point, another blast rocked the building. Debris rained down around them as they scrambled for safety. Across the city, similar scenes unfolded. Ramos barely escaped his lab as it erupted in flames, the fruits of his collaboration with Lyra reduced to ashes in seconds. Hawkins found himself pinned down by sniper fire, his years of military training the only thing keeping him alive as he sought cover. In the chaos, Theron appeared at Hawkins's side, his carapace scorched, but his eyes burning with persistence. "We've been betrayed," he hissed, ducking as another shot whizzed overhead. "Someone's been feeding the purists information." Hawkins's mind raced. The cryopods, he realized with a sinking feeling. Keln must have gotten to someone we woke up. As dawn broke over the smoldering city, the full extent of the purist assault became clear. Key facilities lay in ruins, and the bodies of both humans and Sci who had supported integration littered the streets. In the High Council chambers, Jameson found himself facing a storm of accusations and fear-mongering. Zorn's voice rang out above the din, his words dripping with venom. "See what your peaceful coexistence has brought us," he roared, gesturing to the images of destruction playing on the chamber's screens. "The humans must be contained before they destroy us all." Jameson gripped the podium, his fingers tightening. This was the work of extremists, not the human population as a whole, he argued, his voice steady despite the hostility surrounding him. "We cannot let fear drive us apart when we've come so far together." But he could see the doubt in the eyes of the council members, the seed of xenophobia taking root. In the labs beneath the city, Phillips worked feverishly, his mind consumed by a desperate plan. Zara watched with concern as he manipulated strands of genetic code, pushing the boundaries of ethics and science. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her mandibles clicking nervously. "The risks." "We're out of options," Phillips cut her off, not looking up from his work. "If we don't do something drastic, everything we've built here will crumble." Days passed in a blur of violence and political maneuvering. Hawkins and Theron led strike teams through the underbelly of the city, rooting out purist cells and hunting for the elusive mole. Each raid brought them closer to the truth, but at a heavy cost in blood and trust. Then, just as it seemed the fragile human-Sci alliance would shatter, Phillips made his move. In the middle of a crowded market, he collapsed, his skin erupting in vivid alien lesions. Panic spread like wildfire as other human collaborators exhibited similar symptoms. The city ground to a halt as emergency measures were enacted. Zorn seized the moment, calling for the immediate quarantine of all humans. But as the hours ticked by and no Sci showed signs of infection, confusion replaced fear. It was Nava, the respected Sci academic, who first voiced the question, "If this disease is so deadly, why has no Sci been affected?" The truth, when it came, hit like a thunderbolt. Phillips's disease was revealed as a harmless but visually shocking contagion, engineered to expose the irrationality of the purest fears. Public opinion shifted rapidly. Zorn found himself ousted from power, his rhetoric now seen as dangerous and divisive. The purists, their support base crumbling, retreated into the shadows. As the dust settled, the Sci High Council convened to address the awakening of the remaining humans in cryostasis. The path ahead was uncertain. fraught with challenges. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. Phillips, Jameson, Hawkins, and Ramos stood together, watching as the first new batch of cryopods were prepared for revival. They had weathered the storm, but they knew that their work was a long way to go. The true test of human Sci cooperation lay ahead, and they would need every ounce of ingenuity and resilience to see it through. The hiss of the cryopods opening filled the cavernous chamber. Jameson watched as the first of the newly awakened humans took their first breaths in this alien world. Dr. Richard Franklin stumbled out, his eyes wide as he took in the towering Sci architecture around him. "Welcome to our new home, Doctor," Jameson said, steadying the disoriented sociologist. Franklin blinked rapidly, his gaze darting between Jameson and the alien figures nearby. "This is extraordinary," he managed, his voice hoarse from disuse. Nearby, Colonel Marcus Shaw emerged from his pod, immediately assessing his surroundings with a soldier's keen eye. His posture stiffened as he spotted the Sci observers. "Status report now," Shaw barked at Jameson, ignoring the proffered hand of a Sci medical officer. Jameson frowned. "Colonel, we're guests here. The situation is complex but stable. We've made significant progress in—" "Progress," Shaw interrupted, his voice sharp. "I see we're surrounded by potential hostiles with superior numbers and technology. That's all I need to know for now." In the days that followed, the tensions Shaw brought to the surface began to ripple outward. Jameson found himself in endless meetings, trying to smooth ruffled feathers on both sides. The colonel's actions are concerning. Nava, the Sci academic, chittered during one such session. Fortifying human sectors sends a clear message of distrust. Jameson rubbed his temples. "I understand, but we need to give them time to adjust. Dr. Franklin's cultural immersion program will help bridge the gap." Across the city, Franklin and Navi worked tirelessly to implement their vision. They organized mixed-species social gatherings, language exchange programs, and collaborative art projects. Slowly but surely, bonds began to form between humans and Sci. But not everyone embraced this new era of cooperation. A group of human radicals, emboldened by Shaw's rhetoric, gathered in the shadows of a makeshift bar in the human sector. "We can't trust these bugs," one man spat, banging his head on the table. "Shaw's right. We need to be ready to fight for what's ours." The simmering resentment boiled over during a joint human-Sci cultural festival. As Franklin took the stage to deliver a speech on unity, a group of Shaw's supporters surged forward, brandishing makeshift weapons. "Traitor!" one of them shouted, lunging at Franklin. Chaos erupted. Humans and Sci alike scattered, years of fragile trust threatening to shatter in an instant. But amidst the panic, a clear voice rang out. "Stop! Please listen to me." Alara, the young Sci prodigy, pushed her way to the center of the crowd. Her multifaceted eyes glinted with determination as she addressed both species. "Look around you," she implored. "See the faces of those you call friends, colleagues, neighbors. We are not enemies. We are the architects of a shared future." Her words, spoken with the passion of youth and the wisdom of one who had embraced both cultures, seemed to penetrate the fog of fear and anger. Slowly, the tensions eased. In the aftermath, Shaw found himself stripped of his authority, his aggressive tactics deemed too dangerous for the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Franklin, shaken but resolute, doubled down on his efforts to foster understanding. Alara's role in diffusing the crisis did not go unnoticed. In a historic move, she was appointed to the Sci High Council, becoming a powerful voice for cooperation and integration. As Phillips watched these events unfold, he couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and apprehension. They had overcome this hurdle, but he knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. The awakening of more humans would bring new personalities, new conflicts, and new opportunities into the mix. He turned to Zara, who stood beside him overlooking the city. "We've come so far," he mused. "But sometimes I wonder if we're really ready for what comes next." Zara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Ready or not, it comes," she replied. "But remember, we face it together." As night fell over the Sci capital, lights twinkled in windows where humans and Sci alike prepared for another day in their shared world. The future remained uncertain, but for now, a fragile peace held. The fragile peace that had settled over the Sale capital was shattered by a piercing alarm that echoed through the streets. Phillips bolted upright in his bed, heart racing as the sound grew louder. He rushed to the window, eyes widening at the sight of emergency vehicles speeding towards the city's outskirts. "What's happening?" Zara burst into the room, her carapace glistening with agitation. Before Phillips could answer, his comm device crackled to life. "All senior personnel report to Central Command immediately," a voice barked. "This is not a drill." As they hurried through the corridors of the command center, Phillips and Zara were met by a grim-faced Jameson. "It's Melzan," he said, his voice tight. "He's done something incredibly stupid." The briefing room was a hive of activity. Holographic displays flickered with alarming data streams as Sale and human technicians worked side by side, their earlier animosities forgotten in the face of impending disaster. Melzan stood at the center of the storm, his usual arrogance replaced by naked fear. I was trying to push the boundaries of our energy technology," he stammered, "but the matrices became unstable. I couldn't contain them." Ramos smacked his fist on the console. "Damn it, Melzan! Your push has destabilized the entire fusion reactor network. We're looking at a potential meltdown that could render this planet uninhabitable for centuries." The room erupted into chaos as the implications sank in. Phillips felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He exchanged a glance with Zara, seeing his own realization mirrored in her multifaceted eyes. "We need to act fast," Phillips said, his voice cutting through the din. "Zara, gather every expert you can find. Human, Sale, I don't care. We need the brightest minds working on this now." As Zara moved to comply, the doors burst open. Colonel Shaw strode in, flanked by a group of stern-faced human soldiers. "I'm assuming control of this situation," he announced. "This is clearly an attack on human interests." Jameson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is no time for your paranoia, Colonel. We're facing extinction here." Outside, the city was descending into panic. Dr. Franklin watched from a window as crowds of humans and Sale alike flooded the streets, their faces masks of terror. "We need to maintain order," he muttered, turning to Nava, "or we won't have a civilization left to save." In a makeshift lab, Phillips and Zara worked feverishly alongside Ramos, Lyra, and a chastened Melzan. Holographic models of energy matrices swirled around them as they debated furiously. "What if we created an artificial subspace vortex?" Zara suggested, her mandibles clicking rapidly. Phillips's eyes lit up. "Yes, we could divert the runaway energy into it before containment fails." Ramos nodded, his fingers flying over a datapad. "It's possible, but we'd need to channel power from every reactor on the planet through a central uplink node. That would shut down the global energy grid," Lyra pointed out, her antennae twitching nervously. "We don't have a choice," Phillips said grimly. "It's that or watch the world burn." As the team raced against time to implement their desperate plan, Colonel Shaw paced in his makeshift command post. His eyes narrowed as he listened to the updates. "A planet-wide blackout," he mused. "This could be our chance." Sergeant Hawkins frowned, uncomfortable with the gleam in Shaw's eyes. "Sir, what exactly are you planning?" Before Shaw could answer, a young human officer burst in. "Sergeant Hawkins, sir, we've detected unauthorized access to the uplink node's security systems." Hawkins's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. He turned to the young officer, Kira. "We need to move now." As Hawkins and Kira raced through the chaotic streets, Phillips' voice crackled over the citywide comm system. "Attention all citizens. We are about to initiate an emergency power transfer. Please remain calm and stay in your homes." The city held its breath as the fusion reactor's energy began to flow towards the central node. In the control room, Phillips watched the power levels rise, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just a little more," he muttered. Suddenly, alarms blared. "We're losing connection to the uplink node," Zara shouted. Outside the node's access point, Hawkins and Kira found themselves in a standoff with Shaw and his loyalists. "Stand down, Colonel," Hawkins growled, his weapon trained on his former superior. Shaw's face twisted with rage. "You're throwing away humanity's future, Sergeant." As the confrontation escalated, the city plunged into darkness. The Vortex project teetered on the brink of failure as Phillips and his team fought to maintain the connection. In the streets, Jameson and Franklin struggled to keep order as panicked citizens clashed with each other and the authorities. Nava and Alara moved through the crowds, their voices raised in desperate pleas for unity and calm. Back at the uplink node, Hawkins made his choice. "Kira, secure that console. I'll hold them off." As shots rang out in the darkness, Kira's fingers flew over the controls, re-establishing the connection just as the energy surge reached its peak. In the control room, Phillips watched with breathless expectation as the vortex sprang to life, swallowing the deadly energy moments before catastrophe. The room erupted in cheers, but Phillips's relief was short-lived. "We've averted the meltdown," he announced, his voice heavy. "But we've drained every power source on the planet to do it." As the implications of their Pyrrhic victory sank in, Phillips turned to Zara. "We saved the world," he said quietly. "Now we have to figure out how to live in it." Outside, the first faint rays of dawn broke over a silent, powerless city. The true test of human and Soleil cooperation was just beginning. As the sun rose over the powerless city, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Phillips stood at the window of the control room, his eyes scanning the darkened skyline. The victory over the reactor crisis felt hollow in the face of the challenges that lay ahead. "We need to move quickly," he said, turning to face the assembled team. "Every moment without power puts more lives at risk." Zara nodded, her mandibles clicking softly. "I'll gather our top scientists. We'll need to combine our technologies if we're to have any hope of restoring power." As they filed out of the room, Jameson caught Phillips's arm. "We have another problem," he said, his voice low. "Food supplies are critically low. Without power for refrigeration or processing—" Phillips's heart made. "Understood. Set up a meeting with the agricultural experts from both species. We'll need to pool our resources." Over the next few days, the city became a hive of activity. In makeshift labs, Zara and her young protege Alara worked tirelessly alongside human scientists, their disparate anatomies hunched over shared workbenches as they pieced together hybrid fusion reactors. "Pass me that neutron modulator," Alara chittered, her multifaceted eyes fixed on a holographic schematic floating above the table. Ramos, the human engineer, complied without hesitation, their earlier mistrust forgotten in the face of their shared goal. Across the city, Jameson presided over a tense meeting between human farmers and Soleil hydroponics experts. Dr. Franklin sat at his side, carefully mediating the discussion as centuries of agricultural tradition clashed with alien botanical knowledge. "Your root systems won't support the nutrient load," a grizzled human farmer argued, jabbing a finger at a Soleil diagram. The Soleil botanist's antennae quivered with irritation. "Our hyper-efficient nutrient delivery makes your soil-based methods obsolete." Franklin leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, we don't have the luxury of choosing one method over the other. Our survival depends on integrating both approaches." As the days wore on, small victories began to accumulate. A prototype fusion reactor sputtered to life, providing power to a critical medical facility. The first harvest from a human Soleil hybrid farm yielded crops with unprecedented nutritional density. But beneath the surface of this fragile cooperation, tensions simmered. In the human sectors, crowds gathered around makeshift podiums where Zorn's followers stoked the fires of xenophobia. "They caused this crisis," a speaker shouted, his face contorted with rage. "And now they control our food, our power? We can't let them enslave us." Colonel Shaw, newly freed from confinement, watched these rallies with growing interest. In the chaos of the blackout, he had slipped away from his guards, and now he saw an opportunity in the unrest. In a dimly lit warehouse, Shaw addressed a group of disgruntled human soldiers and civilians. "We have the chance to secure our future," he said, his voice low and intense, "but we must act decisively." As Shaw's militia grew in strength and number, Sergeant Hawkins found himself in an impossible position. Tasked with maintaining order, he watched helplessly as the fragile peace threatened to unravel. "We can't let this escalate," Hawkins told Kira as they patrolled the increasingly tense streets. "But if we crack down too hard, we'll only drive more people into Shaw's arms." The breaking point came when Shaw's forces made their move on a Sele weapons depot. Alarms blared as human and Sele security forces converged on the scene. Hawkins arrived to find a standoff already in progress, with Shaw's militia facing down a line of chitinous Sele guards. "Stand down!" Hawkins shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of angry voices and charging energy weapons. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." But his words fell on deaf ears. As tensions reached a fever pitch, a single shot rang out, and chaos erupted. In the control room, Phillips watched the unfolding disaster with a growing sense of dread. Years of progress teetered on the brink of collapse, threatening to plunge both species into a war neither could afford. "There has to be a way to stop this," he muttered, pacing furiously. Zara looked up from her console, her compound eyes reflecting the glow of emergency displays. "Perhaps there is," she said slowly, "but the cost may be higher than either of our species is willing to pay." Phillips turned to her, his expression grim but determined. "Tell me." Phillips's eyes widened as he absorbed Zara's words. "What do you mean? What cost?" Before Zara could respond, the control room door burst open. Sergeant Hawkins stumbled in, his uniform torn and smeared with soot. "Sir, we've got a situation. The weapons depot—" A thunderous explosion rocked the building, cutting off Hawkins' words. Alarms blared as the room plunged into darkness, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across worried faces. "Status report," Phillips barked, steadying himself against a console. Ramos's fingers flew across a flickering display. "Power grid's destabilizing again. We're losing sectors all over the city." Outside, chaos reigned, the streets filled with panicked citizens, human and Sele alike. Looters smashed storefronts while overwhelmed security forces struggled to maintain order. In the shadowy recesses of an abandoned warehouse, Captain Drexler addressed his followers, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of portable lamps. "The time has come, my brothers and sisters," he proclaimed, eyes gleaming with fanatical fervor. "We will purge this world of the alien taint and reclaim our rightful dominion." The assembled crowd, a motley assortment of disillusioned soldiers and bitter civilians, roared their approval. Drexler raised his hands, savoring the moment before continuing. "Our first target, the fusion plant, will show these chitinous abominations the true might of humanity." As Drexler's forces mobilized, Phillips and his team raced to respond. "Jam their communications," he ordered, striding towards the command center's exit. "Hawkins, I want a security detail at every critical infrastructure site." Jameson fell into step beside Phillips. "What about evacuation protocols? If they breach the fusion plant—" "We can't afford to create more panic," Phillips cut him off. "We need to contain this quickly and quietly." But Drexler's purebloods proved more organized and better equipped than anyone anticipated. They struck with surgical precision, overwhelming the fusion plant's defenses before Phillips could muster an adequate response. Inside the plant's control room, Alara worked frantically to stabilize the reactor core as alarms blared around her. The door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Drexler strode in, flanked by heavily armed soldiers. "Step away from the controls, insect," he sneered, leveling a pulse rifle at Alara's head. Alara's antennae quivered with defiance. "You have no idea what you're doing. If this core destabilizes—" "Silence!" Drexler backhanded her, sending her sprawling. "Secure the alien and any others you find. They're our insurance policy now." As Drexler's forces fortified their position, Phillips convened an emergency meeting. The faces around the table were grim, human, and Sele united in their concern. "We've confirmed at least a dozen Sele hostages," Hawkins reported, including High Council member Alara. Zara's compound eyes flickered with distress. "We must negotiate their release immediately." "Negative," a gruff voice interrupted. All heads turned to see Colonel Shaw enter the room, his uniform pristine despite the chaos outside. "We can't show weakness to these terrorists." Phillips's eyes narrowed. With all due respect, Colonel, you're not in command here. Shaw's lip curled. Perhaps I should be. Your cooperation has led us to this disaster. Before the argument could escalate, Ramos burst in, his face ashen. Sir, we've detected an energy signature from the fusion plant. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Phillips felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying, Ramos? Based on these readings, Ramos swallowed hard. I think they've got an antimatter weapon. The room erupted into panicked chatter. Phillips raised his voice to be heard over the din. We need options, people. How do we defuse this situation without risking civilian lives? As the team debated strategies, Phillips's mind raced. He knew they were running out of time. The fragile peace between humans and Sci teetered on the brink of collapse, with Drexler's finger on the trigger of a weapon that could annihilate them all. In that moment, Phillips made a decision that would change everything. I'm going in, he announced, silencing the room. Alone. Jameson started to protest, but Phillips held up a hand. It's the only way. I'll pose as a sympathizer, try to infiltrate their ranks, and disable the weapon from the inside. Zara's mandibles clicked with concern. It's too dangerous. If they discover your true intentions, then we're no worse off than we are now, Phillips finished grimly. He turned to Hawkins. Sergeant, I need you to assemble a strike team. If I can't defuse the situation peacefully, we'll need to be ready for a full assault. As Phillips prepared for his dangerous mission, Drexler's voice crackled over the city's communication systems. Attention, citizens of this contaminated world. The time has come for humanity to reclaim its destiny. Phillips took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He knew the fate of two species now rested on his shoulders. With a nod to his team, he stepped out into the chaos-filled streets, ready to confront the madman who threatened everything they had built. Phillips tugged at the collar of his stolen pureblood uniform, sweat beading on his forehead as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Drexler's compound. His heart raced with each step, knowing that discovery meant certain death. As he rounded a corner, he overheard two guards talking in hushed tones. It's happening tonight, one of them whispered. Drexler's going to detonate that weapon right in the heart of the bug capital. Phillips's blood ran cold. He pressed himself against the wall, straining to catch every word. But what about our own people still in the city? The other guard asked. Acceptable losses, he says. Once their leadership is wiped out, we'll roll right over what's left of them. The xenobiologist's mind reeled. The situation was far worse than they'd imagined. He had to warn the others, but how? Slipping into an empty storage room, Phillips activated his concealed communicator. His fingers flew over the device, encoding Drexler's coordinates and the details of the plan. Just as he was about to transmit, the door burst open. What do we have here? Drexler's voice was ice. A rat in our midst. Phillips spun around, his hand instinctively moving to conceal the communicator. But it was too late. Drexler's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on the device. Seize him, the captain snarled. Rough hands grabbed Phillips, pinning his arms behind his back. He struggled, managing to hit the transmit button before the communicator was ripped away. Drexler examined the device, his face contorting with rage. You've signed your death warrant, traitor. He turned to his men. Take him outside. I want him to see the fruits of his betrayal before we execute him. As Phillips was dragged through the compound, alarms began to blare. Shouts and the sound of weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Sir! A breathless soldier burst into the corridor. We're under attack. Human and Sci forces have breached the perimeter. Drexler's eyes blazed with fury. How? He glared at Phillips. You did this. Before Phillips could respond, an explosion rocked the building. The lights flickered, plunging them into momentary darkness. In the chaos, Phillips felt a hand grab his arm, pulling him away from his captors. This way, a familiar voice hissed. It was Kira, Hawkins's protege. They sprinted through smoke-filled hallways, the sounds of battle growing louder. As they rounded a corner, Phillips saw daylight streaming through a gaping hole in the wall. Freedom was within reach. Suddenly, Kira shoved him forward with all her might. "Look out!" A blinding flash, a deafening roar. Phillips hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. He rolled over to see Kira crumpled on the floor, a smoking hole in her chest where she had taken the blast meant for him. "No!" Phillips crawled to her side, but it was too late. Kira's eyes were already glassy, her final breath escaping in a soft sigh. There was no time to mourn. Hawkins appeared through the smoke, his face grim. "Phillips, we have to move now!" As they retreated to the extraction point, Phillips saw the toll of their Pyrrhic victory. Human soldiers lay dead alongside their pureblood kin, while Sele warriors keened over fallen comrades. The divide between unity and extremism yawned wider with each life lost. Back at the command center, Phillips delivered his grim report. "Drexler plans to detonate the antimatter warhead in the Sele capital. We have to stop him." Zara's compound eyes flickered with grit. "Perhaps we can." She gestured to a complex holographic display. "Alara has developed a subspace manipulation technology. If we can isolate the warhead's yield—" "But the energy requirements would be astronomical," Ramos interjected. "We'll have to drain power from across the entire planet," Lyra added, her antennae twitching nervously. Phillips looked from face to face, human and Sele alike. "Do we have a choice?" As they prepared for this high-stakes endeavor, none of them noticed Zorn slipping away, his eyes gleaming with malice. In the holding cells below, Drexler looked up as the force field deactivated. "It's time," Zorn said simply. Alarms blared once more as Drexler and his remaining loyalists stormed the containment facility. Theron's security forces engaged them in a brutal firefight, with Jameson caught in the middle. A stray blast sent him flying, his body slamming against a wall with a sickening crunch. In the heart of the facility, Phillips, Zara, and Alara worked feverishly to initiate the subspace isolation sequence. The antimatter weapon pulsed ominously, its containment field fluctuating wildly. "We're losing stability," Alara shouted over the din of alarms and weapons fire. A thunderous explosion rocked the chamber. Drexler stood in the shattered doorway, his face twisted with hate. "It ends now," he snarled, raising his weapon. Time seemed to slow. Alara leapt forward, her body shielding the control panel. Drexler's weapon discharged, and Alara crumpled to the ground. "No!" Zara cried out. Phillips tackled Drexler, the two men grappling for control of the weapon. As they struggled, Alara's voice, weak but determined, cut through the chaos. "Phillips, the final sequence. You must—" With a supreme effort, Phillips wrenched the weapon from Drexler's grasp and brought it down hard on the fanatic's head. Drexler collapsed, unconscious or worse. Phillips rushed to Alara's side, but he could see the light fading from her eyes. She grasped his hand, her mandibles clicking softly. "Finish it," she whispered. "Save them all." With a heavy heart, Phillips turned to the control panel. The fate of two species now rested in his hands as he prepared to divert the apocalyptic blast and forge a new future for humans and Sele alike. Phillips's fingers flew across the control panel, initiating the subspace isolation sequence. Alara's body lay still at his feet, her final words echoing in his mind. Zara stood beside him, her compound eyes fixed on the pulsing antimatter weapon. "Energy levels are critical," Zara reported, her voice tight. "We need more power." Phillips nodded grimly. "Ramos, drain every power source on the planet. We can't afford to hold anything back." Across the world, lights flickered and died. Cities plunged into darkness as every joule of energy was redirected to the containment array. The antimatter warhead trembled, its destructive potential straining against the subspace vortex forming around it. "Containment at 95%, Zara announced. 89%, 93%. The numbers danced erratically as Phillips and Zara fought to stabilize the reaction. Sweat beaded on Phillips's forehead, his muscles tense with concentration. A thunderous boom shook the facility. For a moment, Phillips dared to hope they'd succeeded. Then the world exploded in blinding light. Heat seared Phillips's skin. In that final instant, he saw Zara reaching toward him, her mandibles opening in a silent scream. Then, nothing. Miles away, Hawkins staggered as the shockwave hit. He turned, eyes widening in horror as a colossal mushroom cloud bloomed on the horizon. The blast wave rolled outward, flattening buildings and trees in its path. "No," Hawkins whispered, his voice lost in the deafening roar. As the apocalyptic energies dissipated, Hawkins surveyed the devastation. The once thriving metropolis was now a wasteland of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Fires raged unchecked, and the air filled with choking ash. In the rubble of the command center, Jameson regained consciousness. Pain lanced through his body as he tried to move. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see Theron, the Sele soldier's exoskeleton, scorched and cracked. "Don't move," Theron clicked, his mandibles working furiously. "You're badly injured." Jameson coughed, tasting blood. What happened?" Theron's compound eyes flickered with grief. "The weapon detonated. The city, it's gone." As Theron worked to stabilize Jameson, the ground beneath them shuddered. In the distance, a volcano that had long lain dormant began to spew ash and lava into the sky. Ramos crawled from the wreckage of a collapsed building, his ears ringing. He stumbled through the ruins, calling out for survivors. A handful of engineers emerged, human and Sele alike, their faces etched with shock and despair. "We need to restore communications," Ramos shouted over the rumble of aftershocks. "Find out how bad this is." Days passed in a blur of frantic activity. As power was slowly restored to outlying areas, the true scale of the catastrophe became clear. The antimatter explosion had destabilized the planet's core. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions ravaged the landscape, rendering vast areas uninhabitable. Ramos stood before a makeshift control center, surrounded by exhausted engineers. Jameson lay on a cot nearby, his body swathed in bandages. "We can't stay here," Ramos said, his voice hoarse. "The planet's dying. We need to leave." Jameson struggled to sit up. "How? We don't have the resources for mass evacuation." Ramos's eyes gleamed with desperate inspiration. "The propulsion systems we were developing for deep space exploration, if we can salvage enough components..." Understanding dawned on Jameson's face. An arc. As the planet convulsed around them, Ramos and his team worked tirelessly. They scavenged parts from ruined cities and repurposed military hardware. Slowly, painfully, an interstellar vessel took shape. Hawkins oversaw the grim process of selecting who would board the Ark. Human and Sele alike pleaded for a chance at survival. Each name added to the manifest felt like a knife in his heart. The day of launch arrived. The ground shook constantly now, fissures opening to spew toxic gases into the atmosphere. Ramos stood at the base of the jury-rigged Ark, watching as the chosen few filed aboard. Jameson limped to Ramos's side, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. "Is it enough?" he asked softly. Ramos shook his head. "It has to be." As the Ark's engines roared to life, Hawkins locked eyes with Theron. No words were spoken, but volumes passed between them. The weight of their species' futures pressed down on both their shoulders. The vessel lifted off, climbing through roiling clouds of ash and debris. From the viewport, Ramos and Jameson watched their world recede, its surface a patchwork of angry red magma flows and steaming oceans. On board, humans and Sele huddled together, united in their grief and uncertainty. As the Ark accelerated away from their dying homeworld, Ramos turned to address the survivors. "We carry with us all that remains of our civilizations," he began, his voice thick with emotion.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.